I'm Ranting Duderino, aka Ranting Dude, and I own a lot of t-shirts. Some of the t-shirts that I own, I've owned for many years. Some of the t-shirts I own, I've even taken across country. I figure that means they must be important to me, so I'm now collating and collecting my t-shirts in a video log, aka a vlog. This t-shirt I've had for a very long time. I've had it since high school. It's got a big hole in the middle of it now. It comes from the webcomic Toothpaste for Dinner, which is written and drawn by a man named Drew who lives in Ohio. I find that this t-shirt often trips people up. The distinctive, lopsided way that Drew draws his characters, people have a hard time discerning that as a person. All of his characters they're kind of skewed, canted, giving them all sort of a slacker vibe. I think part of the success of Toothpaste for Dinner is the way he depicts people as misshapen and hunched. You know, most people out in the real world are kind of weird and lumpy. I myself am misshapen. Another thing that I think really trips people up about this shirt is that it's a drawing of a guy wearing a shirt that has text on it. The text is, "My other t-shirt has a joke on it." But the idea is, it's a comic. He's wearing the shirt. Even though I'm wearing the shirt, this is not the shirt that I am wearing. So it's metatextually a little dense. And I find that people on the street will just struggle with that. I bought this shirt at the height of a trend in t-shirts where everyone wore a shirt that had block text on it. Plain t-shirts with blocked text. It was an era where you could turn on a CU Buffs game and see someone in the stands wearing a shirt that said, "Nice shoes, wanna fuck?" I used to have a t-shirt that had a phrase, something along the lines of, the voices in my head are telling me not to kill you. I didn't keep that shirt, and I'm not going to be doing a vlog on it. Around the same time, it was also very popular to wear pre-aged shirts, or shirts that had been designed to look like they'd been owned and worn for quite a while. I think both these trends in t-shirts stemmed from Generation X's ascendancy to the dominant cultural force in America. You know, the early 2000s was roughly around the time that the oldest Gen Xers went from consuming culture to producing it. And so you got a lot of t-shirts that had snarky quips on them, or t-shirts that were designed to look like if you wore them, you were a lackadaisical, easygoing slacker. It was part of the Generation X quest for authenticity, I think. And naturally, as soon as it became profitable and hit the broader public, it became perverse and commodified and marketed to the point where you would buy a shirt that 30 years prior, if you went out in it, it signified that you were a rebel and didn't conform to societal norms. And all of a sudden they were being sold at JCPenney. That's kind of the way things always go. This shirt did not come pre-wore out. I earned all these holes. Any Gen Xer would be proud, I think. I wear this shirt because I love webcomics. When I was growing up, I was always really into newspaper comics. I was a little kid when Calvin and Hobbes was still being printed. I kind of roped my parents into a Denver Post subscription so I could read the daily newspaper comics. I liked Get Fuzzy, Foxtrot. I got to enjoy Boondocks by Aaron McGruder when it was at its height. Of course, by the time I was ready to read newspaper comics, it was already pretty much a dead medium. All the art had been sucked out of it by King Features Syndicate, and an increasing drive by newspapers to limit the size and scope of their comics to make room for more ads. Thankfully, some different conditions colluded to allow webcomics to take off. In the early 2000s, the internet was still pretty new, so it hadn't quite been monopolized by websites, like Facebook or Twitter or Reddit. It was a lot easier than it had ever been before to create your own website. Around this time, it was the birth of the Google ad model, which made it easier to advertise your niche websites and reach a broader audience. Economically, we were still enjoying some of the benefits of the 90s, and so it was easier than ever for creative people to make their art and share it with the world at large. What happened was it was like a platinum vein had been tapped. All of a sudden, all of these incredible creators were putting out awesome comics. There's so many to list. There was Toothpaste for Dinner. There was also John Allison's Scary Go Round, which later became Bad Machinery, and then later became Giant Days. Chris Onstad and Akewood started around 2000, 2001. Christopher Hastings started Dr. McNinja in the forums of Something Awful until he got his own website and even eventually started getting colorized. It was a blossoming field full of just so many diverse and wonderful creators. There was Canadian Kate Beaton with her Hark a Vagrant. There was Ryan North with Dinosaur Comics. Some of them were sort of a hybrid of alt newspaper comics and web comics, like David Malky's Wondermark used to be in paper issues of The Onion. All of these creative people came together, and they started out pretty diffuse, but through the internet they were all able to reach each other. They would start doing guest comics for each other, and they formed a community and had a culture of webcomics creators. Some of them even bought a house in Mexico and went down there and just focused full time on creating their comics and their art. But not all of it was, the best. Obviously, as within any artistic medium, most of it's going to be crap. Famously, there were a lot of just terrible webcomics about people playing video games. Penny Arcade was probably the best, and that's not really saying much. Probably the height of webcomics as a medium, as much as I hate to admit it, was probably Homestuck. I'm sure if you've spent any time on the internet at all, you're familiar. Even though I feel like the story got too complicated and kind of fell apart under its own weight, he used the medium to its fullest. In a newspaper comic, you can't have any animations. He also interacted with the fans. The reader was more involved in what happened in the comic than, say, something that got written and drawn and then published months later. It was really an exciting time. More webcomics creators came together. Eventually, Jeffrey Brown, who did the cartoons Overcompensating and Wigoo, started a merchandising company. He got a bunch of comics creators under his banner selling their t-shirts and prints. But things changed. The economy took a turn for the worse, and suddenly it was no longer viable for webcomics creators to make a living just doing their comics and selling prints and t-shirts and mugs. A lot of them moved on. Ryan North, he still does Dinosaur Comics, but I think at this point he's much more known for print comics. He does Fantastic Four. He did a really amazing run on Squirrel Girl. John Allison's Giant Days eventually became its own comics run. Jeffrey Brown started releasing these really cutesy little comic books about Darth Vader raising a young Luke and Leia. Bought one of those for my dad for Christmas once. Some webcomics artists like Ryan Pequin are now more known in the animation industry. They do stuff like storyboard. Kate Beaton does New Yorker cartoons now and put out a really amazing graphic novel called Ducks about her experiences working in the northern Canada oil fields. It's a lot harder to do webcomics nowadays. If you want attention, you got to post it on Reddit or Twitter, Pinterest. There was some tragic falling outs with some of these webcomic communities. I could probably do a whole other blog entry about what happened with John Allison and Pictures for Sad Children. Although I do still see webcomics being successful. There's the guy that does the webcomic Swords. That got really big on Reddit. Swan Boy started in like 2018, and it even got an FX show there for a little bit. Most of the creators that were successful early on now have like Patreons, where their built-in audience that they've already accrued gives them money. Chris Onstad does that now. Danielle Corsetto, I think so. She used to do Girls with Slingshots. You don't see the same amount of creativity, good and bad, that you used to. The internet has changed. Drew is still at it with Toothpaste for Dinner. He's kind of canceled lately, certainly in my mind. It came out that he was formerly a collaborator on a Twitter account called The Share Zone, and then it turns out he forced everybody else out, which is deranged. The idea that you would have to do Machiavellian backstabbing politics to gain control of a Twitter account that posts shitposts. But I guess you can sell t-shirts from those shitposts, so the internet economy, deeply, deeply stupid. Toothpaste for Dinner seems like it's a fairly popular webcomic. It's been around forever, and it's got a lot of fans over the years, but I've only ever seen one other person out in the real world wearing another Toothpaste for Dinner t-shirt, which is very exciting. It's a great way to bond with somebody, bond with a stranger. As popular as webcomics got, it's still a pretty niche interest. If anybody happens to be watching this and they're also a fan of webcomics, please feel free to leave a comment. Talk about some of your favorite webcomics or how you feel about the webcomics culture back then and today. Until then, I'm gonna keep wearing this shirt until it falls apart like my Gen X ancestors taught me. Thank you very much.